It's like,
And, many of the prophets also prophesied that COVID would be brought to an end before it became a global pandemic. Sean Bowles is a pastor in Los Angeles and a prophet who's closely connected with Bethel Church in Redding. He was speaking in South Africa with Bill Johnson back in February 28, 2020. And he said, "The Lord showed me the end of coronavirus. The tide is turning now." He also told Fox News it's not going to be the pandemic that people are afraid of. So he was one of many prophets that said that COVID would really end before it started and it wouldn't be a really big thing. On top of that, the declarations of these prophets have failed to end COVID. Many of these prophets have been teaching, including Bill Johnson at Bethel Redding, that he's an apostle, that Christians have the authority through their spoken words to make decrees and declarations that can bring coronavirus to an end. And despite all the declarations and the decrees the apostles and prophets have been making, they haven't been able to bring COVID to an end. At Bethel Redding, all the people who attend that church there, they would recite a declaration: "Everywhere I go becomes a perfect health zone." But despite their declaration of perfect health, the church had a major outbreak of COVID, reporting over 300 cases among their students and churchgoers. And Bill Johnson has preached sermons from Psalm 91 saying that, insinuating that followers could avoid catching coronavirus if they just made decrees and declarations against it. So it's been a really bad year for the prophets, and they know it too. Bill Johnson actually said on Victory Channel, this was in a recent interview on December 16th, Victory Channel's Kenneth Copeland's YouTube channel.
yeah.
And during an interview he was featured on, along with Dutch Sheets and Lance Wallnow, these are two other NAR prophets and leaders, he said that he acknowledged that people are mocking the prophets, including many people within the church are mocking the prophets because of these apparently failed prophecies, especially about Donald Trump. And Bill Johnson said that it's a tragedy because it's part of the foundation of the church, the apostles and prophet. If we as the body of Christ are in any way mocking that gift because things don't seem to be as they have announced and we're in real trouble, I've been praying that the hand of the Lord would be obvious and openly defending these that he has raised up with his word in their mouth. That's the thing I've been contending for. So even Bill Johnson recognizes that the apostles and prophets have fallen in disrepute with their failed predictions this year.
But then the real problem, according to him, is not that. It's not that. I mean, it's not that. I'm sorry. It's the real problem is the disrepute, not the cause of the disrepute.
Right. It's not that the prophets were wrong.
Right.
It's that they need to be vindicated because they're being mocked, and then people won't accept apostles and prophets as being for today.
So I'm thinking of some verses in Isaiah. When I think of all of the prophecies you mentioned that they had for the upcoming year, the phrase "smooth things" came to mind, and it's found in Isaiah chapter 30. For they are rebellious people, lying children, unwilling to hear the instruction of the Lord, who say to the seers, "Do not see," and to the prophets, "Do not prophesy to us what is right. Speak to us smooth things. Prophesy."
I like that. Yeah.
Prophesy illusions. And of course, Jeremiah said that they say peace, peace when there is no peace.
There is no peace, right?
But this is the hallmark of a false prophet. He tells you what you want to hear.
Now, I want to just point out one more time, Holly, for the viewers, and there's a description, a link in the description box below where they can get your book, God's Super Apostles, and they can even get the workbook that goes with it. Why should they do that from the author? Why should they get it? Aside from the fact that you believe it's really important, what's helpful about it?
Well, the book it explains what the New Apostolic Reformation, the theological framework for the New Apostolic Reformation. So if people read this book, they will have more of an understanding of the New Apostolic Reformation than even many of the people who are part of the New Apostolic Reformation, because it gives a framework, the theological framework. It explains what the core teachings and practices are. It gives a sense of the size and scope of this movement. And we also have the larger book. This one's beat up, but A New Apostolic Reformation, a biblical response to a worldwide movement. This is the larger book that's much more detailed, heavily documented, goes much more in depth into the teachings of this movement as well. But the other book that you show, God's Super Apostles, has a lot of really practical advice at the end for people who have questions. Maybe they know that their church, or they're afraid their church might be getting caught up in these teachings. So it gives advice about how to approach their church leaders and talk to them about their concerns. Maybe some people realize that maybe they are part of the New Apostolic Reformation and want to know how to distance themselves from this movement. So it gives advice for those people.
Right.
Maybe some people want to protect their children from getting caught up in this movement. So it has advice about how to do that. So this has a lot of practical advice and stories and anecdotes of people too who've been harmed by this movement.
See, that's really important. Now, just this is a personal thing for me. This is not necessarily biblical, not biblical, anti-biblical. Usually when I talk with people that are in severe heresy, I have found it is better to, A, be equipped myself on the issues, whatever the issues are, and B, to ask questions rather than make assertions. If I can ask them a question that'll help them to think things through, they may be willing to look at more information. Whereas if I just make assertions like you are following a false prophet, there are times when that is really appropriate. But there's a lot of times when you go, okay, that push is just going to cause them to push back. They're invested in this belief. And you're taking away their investment.
I think most people jump there too early in the debate or the discourse. In other words, jump from the probing questions to the assertions. I don't think you do that. I think a lot of people, though, do it too early. I see this in social media, especially.
Mm-hmm.
Just trying to
make that thoughts on that, Holly?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I really like Greg Koukl's book, Tactics.
Yeah.
It's a book about the tactics for navigating discussions, and it's aimed at discussions with non-believers primarily, but he talks about that a lot, about the asking questions. And so I actually like to apply what he wrote in his book Tactics to conversations with people in the NAR, and how to winsomely and persuade, to go through tactically and interact with people about this movement. Because if you start with questions, then people will let down their guard, and it won't feel like you're attacking them. And you can actually gain information too by asking questions that will then help you later, know how to gently expose the weaknesses in their thinking.
Right, because they're going to tell you why they're invested in what they're invested in. Jesus did that kind of thing when he had someone come up and say, okay, which is the greatest of the commandments? And he didn't say this one or that one. He said, well, you've read the law. What do you think? Mm-hmm. And then he built on the response because he answered correctly, and he built on a response from there. So tactics can be really important, and unfortunately not often taught in churches.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. It's not just having the knowledge of what people in the NAR believe, but it's knowing the questions to ask them. And a lot of times it might be a question like, if somebody shares that they've really enjoyed the teaching of Bill Johnson and Bethel Church in Reading, or maybe it's Mike Bickle at the International House of Prayer in Kansas City, Missouri. Say, well, what is it that you particularly appreciate about Bill Johnson's teaching or Mike Bickle's teaching? And then when they share that, you could follow up with, where do you find support for that in Scripture? And then often what they'll do is they'll give a Bible verse that's being used out of context, and then you could follow up with something like, well, That's interesting. I've never quite read that passage that way before. Have you ever considered any alternative understandings of that passage? Have you ever looked at any Bible commentaries or anything like that to see if people have other understandings? And then by doing that, maybe it will at least plant some seeds of doubt in their head and cause them later to go, do a little more study and maybe look at some Bible commentaries.
Now, that line of questioning would not work with a Jehovah's Witness, for example. I can see where that would go off the tracks, because have you ever considered something else besides the Watchtower is like the quickest way of getting kicked out of the organization, right? But it doesn't. It's the NAR isn't as authoritarian in that sense, is it?
Well, it is. It all comes down to authority, I would say, in this movement. They really do believe the apostles and prophets have been given authority, and they're loath to question that authority. But that means, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, when I say authoritarian, I mean in the sense of you're not even allowed to read contrary opinions.
Right. They don't say that, and they may discourage it. Bill Johnson has made some statements to the effect of discouraging people from reading things that are written by people who don't walk in working miracles.
Right. I would distinguish between two approaches to that. In other words, there's the top-down. The top-down. You must not read this. If you do, you'll get kicked out. That's the Watchtower Society. And then there's the discouraging you from doing it and relying on social pressure within the movement, so that you end up kind of being spiritually ostracized, but not necessarily kicked out. So you're saying that they will do the latter in the
I would say it's more of the latter. It's more of a social pressure. Not that you will be formally kicked out of. And to be clear, the NAR is not a single organizational entity. I know you guys know that, but not all people know that. It's a set of beliefs. So any church that believes that apostles and prophets are for today and that they should govern the church is NAR by definition, whether or not they accept that label for themselves or put that label on their website. And so it's not an organization someone can be kicked out of either. And most NAR churches would not say they would kick someone out for reading something that disagrees with their teaching.
And we can be glad for that, and we can kind of use it as if you know what when you're doing this, when you're using tactics, and you know what the person you're trying to reach is up against in terms of getting out of what they're trapped in. It helps you to know how far you can kind of gently push them in the direction that they need to go. So,
and planting seeds of doubt is just so good. Even if it doesn't seem like at the time they're open to hearing it, that seed will germinate maybe later, and maybe they will sneak over, and look at a Bible commentary when nobody's around.
Well, even Jehovah's Witnesses will do that. That they will do it behind the backs of their local Kingdom Hall. I mean, people, but if they're sufficiently motivated. So,
right.
Yeah.
Right, and walking them through, even a Jehovah's Witness, Ron knows this. We've been doing this for over 3 decades now. There's been occasions when we've led Jehovah's Witnesses to the faith from the Watchtower by asking questions about the Bible. Now, they had particular understandings, and so I would go to passages that the Watchtower literally has nothing written on and ask them, okay, can you help me understand this passage? Because we have here Jehovah sending Jehovah. How does that work exactly? When does Jehovah send Jehovah anywhere? And Jehovah is going to dwell in the midst of the people. When did that happen? And he communicated with Jehovah, and now they have to start scratching their head and start actually looking at the text. And it's just a question. I'm not saying anything. I'm just asking a question. Mm-hmm. So, but back to the NAR, you're following kind of the same process. It's an interesting proposition. Haven't heard it that way before. Maybe you can show me in the context how that plays itself out.
Now, one of the things you do, Don, a lot is appeal to bad prophecy gone bad in the Watchtower Society, failed prophecies.
Right.
and sometimes that's pretty effective with Jehovah's Witnesses. How effective is it with NAR people, do you
Good
think?
question.
Well, right, because they've already set it up that you can be a genuine prophet of God and make mistakes when you prophesy. It's not always effective because their followers have already been primed that it's okay for them to make mistakes. But interestingly, I would say the majority of their prophecies are not even specific enough. They're so vague that there's actually no way to even test whether they've been fulfilled.
There's an interesting parallel between what you just said and the Watchtower Society. And that is that what you talk about, how they say it's possible to be mistaken as a prophet. The Watchtower Society has this doctrine of new light that allows them to overturn, to maintain that they are Jehovah's prophetic organization and yet overturn previous prophecies for all practical purposes. So what you really have to do, what I think another thing probably that both the NAR and the Watchtower Society have in common is that most of the people in it are uninformed about what the Bible says about false prophecy. The verses which point to the fact that God really takes it so seriously that for his Old Testament people, stoning was the penalty. I mean, that's pretty serious. So anyways, but this has been a really bad year. I mean, it's been amazingly bad. For I guess I want to know, because I didn't follow it that closely. What did they tell the parents of that little 6-year-old girl, Olive?
Well, so the parents, the mom was a worship leader at Bethel Church in Reading. And so she actually was behind, she was one who really felt like, God wanted them to make decrees that Olive would be resurrected. And the church agreed to come along and support her in that. And they enlisted their followers worldwide to agree to make decrees and declarations to raise Olive. So I don't know that they had to tell the mom and dad anything so much, because they are steeped in these teachings themselves and were actually initiated the attempts to raise Olive.